Hi, I'm Danielle, and welcome to This Enchanted House. We are on our next segment of Exploring Aesthetic, Witchcore. As a preemptive thing, if you are a witch and you post in my comments that witchcraft is not an aesthetic or my practice is not an aesthetic, I will know you have not watched this video because we're going to talk about it. But we need to talk about witchcore as an aesthetic first, and then we'll get into all the other stuff. So just hold on and we'll get there, and I would love to hear your feedback eventually, but just posting that as a reaction to the thumbnail, I'll just say, please watch the video. So, what is witchcore as an aesthetic? Witchcore draws from the archetype of the witch in our modern mythos and draws from symbols and items and imagery associated with witches. In general, you think things like pointed hats, the color black, cauldrons and brooms, herbs and potions, spell books, black cats, ravens, frogs, all the things, the familiars. In general, but as a general aesthetic, it actually has all these sort of little mini niche sub-aesthetics that kind of go along with it. So for instance, you might see someone who's witchcore who's very traditional Halloween witches with black and orange and pointy hats and very sort of like how you would see in Halloween decorations and maybe even vintagey Halloween decorations, that kind of witch. You might see something that's more sort of a modern take on witchcraft, kind of combines punk and goth with witchcraft, something straight out of the craft, which we'll talk about when we get to genre. Or you might see sort of these types of witches, you might see a sea witch who, along with all the witch type stuff, you also see seashells and fish and the colors changed into aquamarines and dark navies and colors associated with the ocean. Or you might see a forest witch who, has leaves and wears the color green, or something maybe along the lines of that. Or you might see something along the lines of a cottage witch, which takes elements that you find in cottagecore and combines them with elements you find in witchcore, and they kind of meld together to form this sort of idea of this witch who lives in a little cottage and talks to the animals and goes out in the forest and collects mushrooms. So aesthetically, this is very much tapping into the idea of fantasy, and in also some ways female empowerment, because the witch, especially in the 60s, kind of feminism adopted witch as a symbol of an empowered woman, a woman who lives outside of the norms, who lives outside of society. And I would say today it's gone beyond that. It's just someone who, the aesthetic is once again someone who lives outside the norms, outside of society, who has this special power that makes them special. And it is an escapist fantasy, like all aesthetics we talk about kind of are. There's some element of escapism and fantasy involved, and this one is really strong on it in a lot of ways. So let's talk about genre. The witch, like I said, is an archetype. It's, when we talk about archetypes, that means it's sort of this general grouping of things that we instantly recognize. We instantly recognize the witch in the story. She is the person who lives outside of society. She practices magic. She has all these magical sort of accoutrements surrounding her, though it changes according to culture and time and all this other stuff. For the purposes of this video, we're mostly going to be focusing on the European versions of things, because that's really where modern witchcraft comes from. I'll talk about more of that when I get to lifestyle and subculture. So yeah, it's this archetype, and we see it in ancient history. We see figures throughout mythology like Circe, Baba Yaga, Caradwen, these women who practice magic, who do something outside. They're often antagonists, and often kind of villainized in these stories. Not necessarily, but or it can be very kind of neutral figures at best, but so they're in these old stories, and so when we retell the fairy tales, we always have the Wicked Witch. Disney has Maleficent, and the Evil Queen, Mad Madam Mim. We have your whole slew of evil witches to choose from there. But as we get into the modern age, like a lot of villains from folklore, including vampires, werewolves, I think zombies now, kind of get, the outsiders kind of celebrated and seen as someone who's been misunderstood, who's got all these great secrets and stuff. So we see the witch change from that to we start with things like Bell, Book, and Candle, and Bewitched, where the witch, she does kind of get a little neutered. She's made into the housewife, but she still retains that magic, where the idea is there's this sort of domestic magic. And then in more recent times, we've seen things like the craft, practical magic, even hocus pocus. Even though they're the villains, they're kind of relatable villains, even though they're really evil. I don't know anyone who doesn't go, amok, amok, amok. So, and then I almost wonder, because there is a sequel coming out, that maybe they're going to get a little bit of a redemption arc somehow or something. They won't be the villains in this one so much. They'll be like the anti-heroes. I'd love that. I'd love to see that, actually. That'd be an interesting way to take the characters. But I'm just speculating here. I don't have any insider information on that. But so we've seen the witches super present in genre. And I think this is where a lot of Witchcore came from, especially movies like Practical Magic and The Craft. There was The Witch, which, is historic, but there's things like that. The Love Witch, which had sort of this whole 60s, 70s horror vibe. It's a good movie, though. If you don't like weird things, it's not going to be your cup of tea, but it is a aesthetically gorgeous movie, and it nails the aesthetic so well. And I like the story too, but it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, I'll just say that. You have to be kind of a fan of that kind of genre of horror. Yeah, but modern incarnations, Charmed is another one where we've had both the original and the current reboot, which even kind of updates it further. We've got Sabrina, of course, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, who's kind of been there all along. She's in the first with, Bewitched and Archie comics, and then we see the television series in the 90s. It's 90s or 2000s? I'll correct it down here if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was 90s, right? It feels very 90s to me. And the modern kind of horror reboot, so like I said, I think this is where mostly the aesthetics started. I really haven't talked about how the new modern aesthetic movement, where it's a little different than past ones, where usually they come out of subculture and genre and lifestyle. The new one kind of usually sometimes the aesthetic comes first, and this is one of those rare cases where it's just all looping around on itself. But I think the aesthetic, because you see a lot of mood boards that draw from things like Practical Magic and the Practical Magic houses, like iconic. You see, from The Craft or from a lot of Hollywood movies, which leads us back to lifestyle and subculture. So this is where it kind of gets weird, because Witchcraft, I'm combining those two together because there is a lifestyle, which is, we will say, is a religious, spiritual, and magical practice known as witchcraft. And then there's the subculture around that. It's part of the larger pagan subculture. And to further clarify what I was talking about earlier, likewise, we're going to concentrate on the witchcraft traditions that come out of Europe. Witchcraft, and especially in the English language, is sometimes used as a catch-all to catch anything that is outside of that involves any kind of magical practice, whether it be Santeria or voodoo or shamanism, or just anything that somehow involves something that isn't in the sort of mainstream view of what, or involves some sort of magical practice of some kind. Though that's a whole other debatable topic for a whole other video. But that's what we're going to talk about here, because that's ones that really sort of are still related to Witchcore. Because here's the thing. Those practices and those traditions draw from the same mythologies, the same histories, the same canon that the genre does. But instead of treating it as an element in a story and an archetype that, oh, that's the witch. I know what she's going to do in the story. I know how she operates, that fills in some blanks that the writer doesn't have to. You have people who've taken and looked at like archaeological evidence, primary texts, and tried to recreate these practices in modern times. Most famously, Gerald Gardner and Wicca, but also traditional witchcraft, a lot of Norse traditions, Slavic traditions. I'm kind of all lumping them together for the purposes of this video, but I'm not saying they're all the same. I'm just saying they're all related enough and part of this sort of witchcore or trend to think. So here's the thing, as I said at the beginning, there's a lot of witches. When witchcore first became popular, which first was on TikTok and Instagram and Tumblr of all the mood boards and stuff, is like, my practice isn't an aesthetic. This is serious. This is, I've studied. It takes work. You can't just call yourself a witch because you put on a black hat. And it's a fair response. I mean, that is true. I have been a practicing witch for 20 years. But as I've talked about before, aesthetics are born usually, up until recently, out of things like subculture and lifestyle and genre. And even today, that's like I said, it's really another video I want to do I haven't gotten to yet. Witchcraft doesn't exist in a vacuum, the practice of. The practitioners exist, and we post things online and we walk around, and I know I'm a little over the top today because when I do these I like to do the over the top version. I am loving this dress today, by the way. This top. This is a thrifted top. I got this for like $4 and I love this. The sleeves, I feel whoosh. So I am feeling very over the top witchy today. So. But I could walk into a witchcraft convention or a witchcraft event and no one would bat an eye. I would actually kind of blend in. I mean, we have an aesthetic, and it might not, you say, well, that's not my aesthetic. I have, I like this thing, I like this thing. So maybe your aesthetic's mid-century modern. Doesn't mean elements of the witchcraft don't enter in. You have things in your house, I'm sure, that reflect that. They might be mid-century style sculptures of your gods and goddesses, or you might have something a vessel that's a mid-century style pottery vase. You're still using those elements. You've just interpreted them with another aesthetic, which I said in the beginning, Witchcore does all the time. Witchcore itself doesn't just stay in this nice little box. It likes to combine with other aesthetics too. So just kind of acknowledge you have an aesthetic, and that witchcraft in general has an aesthetic. There are things that are just associated with it. That's why it's an archetype. It's something that's, easy fill in the blanks. Oh, pointed hat, cauldron, broom, witch. Good, now I know a whole sort of, now whether how accurate your situation is. But, at the end of the day, first of all, I think Witchcore kind of has peaked a while ago, and it's kind of, the people who are into it either have moved on to the next thing, or, they've actually investigated witchcraft and they're become witches, like straight up. Like I know a lot of young people who were interested in the aesthetic and then kind of like, oh, well, this is really a thing, and the aesthetic spoke to me. It turns out it spoke to me because all the stuff that it represents also speaks to me. So there you go. It doesn't mean you can't be kind of like, it's always not fun when, I hate to say this, is when you are the outsider and what you like becomes trendy. It's the very hipster thing of, oh, I liked that before it was cool. Good for you. Now it's cool. Wait 10 minutes and it won't be again, and you can go right back to what you were doing. So that was our brief foray into Witchcore and the associated genres and subcultures. I'd love to hear from you guys, whether Witchcore is one of your aesthetics, or you're a practicing witch and how you feel about the aesthetic aspects of witchcraft, and how a little bit, this is obviously a little bit my opinion, and I'd love, if you disagree with me, I'd love to hear why. in the comments below. Also, I just want to thank everyone. I just got over 200 subscribers, so I'm really thrilled. We've kind of doubled how many people we have here. So hi everyone, welcome to the Enchanted House. If you're not a subscriber, you're more than welcome to join us. Likewise, if you like this video, please give it a like. You can check out my other videos, and if you are subscribed, you will always be able to keep up with the latest and the greatest. I'd also love to connect with you guys on social media. There are links to Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter below. I do things, especially on my Instagram. Well, I cross-post everything, but you know, I do go to estate. I do my estate sale finds, drink night with my husband, and a lot of other fun things over there too. So I'd love to see you over there if you're already a subscriber here. I hope you guys have an enchanted day, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!